We've been working through the book of Ecclesiastes, and we've made a milestone. We've come to a milestone in our study together. And that is, we are halfway through this book. I don't know about you, but it's been some heavy lifting. And quite honestly, I've been very encouraged because I think God has really used this book and this study to encourage growth in people, in your life and in my life. And so we're very thankful for that. And when we think about the book of Ecclesiastes, it's really important for us to remember this is a book that was written many, many years ago. In fact, you'll find the book of Ecclesiastes over in the Old Testament, and it was written by King Solomon, a very wise man. In fact, stated of King Solomon, he's the wisest man to have ever lived, and so he has a lot of wisdom. And when we come to the book of Ecclesiastes, we recognize that we're not just tapping into his wisdom, but we fully believe that God gave him the words that are before us. And so Solomon was writing to an initial audience. In fact, Solomon is writing this book at a later time in his life. He's an old man reflecting back over life with great wisdom. And so we have that, but we have more than that. We have a letter to us from God that remains very, very relevant. I don't know about you, but as I've worked through Ecclesiastes, I've just been reminded at how relevant this book is for our lives today. And certainly this is that section of material in the Bible that's considered wisdom literature. Now, when I talk about wisdom literature, this is specifically what I mean. Wisdom is the ability to see the larger picture. You see the big picture. I've made no secret before you guys for quite some time now that I have a Doberman, a pup, and this Doberman is about to get the best of me. You know, I mean, she's got puppy brain. And having puppy brain, what I've discovered is that with puppy brain comes this dilemma of not being able to see the big picture. For instance, the other night, we were buttoning things up there in the house, trying to get ready for bed. And so we go to the kennel. Everything's looking good. I open the kennel door and I say, "Zoe, in the kennel." To which she looks at me and turns around and runs upstairs. And I'm thinking, this is not the day for this. You know what I mean? I mean, you cannot see the bigger picture here because this is not going to end well for you. This is not going to end well. And so in many things with Zoe, in training her, she gets into that mindset where she just does not see the bigger picture. You know, I take a food bowl out to her, a water bowl out to her, and I want to feed her, I want to water her, but she wants me there by her side while she's eating and drinking. And I'm like, no, this isn't how it works. You stay here and eat, and I go do my stuff. And then later on, we join up. But there comes a point where she don't care about the water and the food. You know, she's got puppy brain. She's in the here and now. She's right in this moment. And what I've discovered about life is that we tend to go through life with that same mindset. We don't have the wisdom, a perspective that allows us to see the big picture. Now, I want to state from the very beginning that what is before us today, the text that we have before us, is to us from God. So we don't have to stand up here and say, "God, would you please speak to us? God, would you speak to us?" Because God has already spoken to us. And so what our prayer is today is, God, help us to understand what you've said. Because you have spoken. Our problem is we need to understand what you've said. And so God's word has been given to us. He has spoken to us. Now, we've kind of tagged this book of Ecclesiastes with this phrase here. It's real truth for dysfunctional people. If you want to really understand what the book of Ecclesiastes is about, it is real truth for dysfunctional people. And I do not have to make a large argument at just how dysfunctional we are. We tend to think about everybody else is being dysfunctional, but the reality is that we're just as dysfunctional. We have dysfunction in our lives. And you'll remember from a couple of weeks ago, Thomas was preaching Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 1, and he was talking about how when we come together, we bring a certain level of dysfunction with us. As you go to the house of the Lord, guard your steps. So this morning, as you were coming here, Solomon's wisdom to us, God's word to us, was that we come with guarded steps. That we do not just come out of routine. We don't haphazardly do this. That we come with guarded steps. I want to mention to you, by the way, in 2 weeks, we're going to be observing the Lord's Supper together. November the 10th. So put that down on your calendars. We're going to be talking about that some next week, and then certainly coming into the week after. We want to prepare our hearts. So he would say to us that we need to come with intentionality. We don't just show up, we come with intentionality. And so we are dysfunctional people. Now, chapter 6 is our focus today, but before we jump into chapter 6, I want to go back to last week's time and look at chapter 5, verses 18 through 20, because I think that this will help us get a running start and really understand what he's saying in chapter 6. And so here we go. This is really the blessed life, is what he's going to make an argument for, beginning in verse 18 of chapter 5. He says, "Here is what I've seen to be good and fitting." So he's just given us a list of everything that is wrong with the world, all the dysfunction within the world. And then he shifts gears and he says, here's what I've seen to be good and fitting: to eat, to drink, and to enjoy oneself and all the labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. And you notice, it's interesting in that verse, I can't help but remind you of this, that he uses the word toil and enjoyment in the same sentence. We think of toiling and we don't think of fun, right? And so he's saying that your work, your job, your occupation is going to be filled with toil. If you are looking for a stress-free job, you're not going to find it. Because as soon as you enter yourself into the equation, it has become stressful. That there are no places that provide stress-free jobs. When we work with people, when we work just in an environment, we experience toil. We experience that. But he says, I hope, my prayer is, my vision of understanding what is good and fitting is that you enjoy yourself, that you eat and drink and you enjoy all this labor that you're toiling under the sun, because this is God's gift to him. This is his reward. This enjoyment is God's gift. Furthermore, verse 19, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in the labor. This is a gift of God. He's just restating what he has stated in verse 18. And you notice that this is the gift from God. That the resources that you have, the ability to enjoy, is from God's good hand. That is a gift from God. And so this morning, my prayer for us is that we understand that we have wisdom, that we gain wisdom that Solomon has been sharing, that God has given us, and that we see this. And in verse 20, for he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. I love that verse, verse 20. It's such a key verse in understanding the importance of going through life and enjoying the life that God has given us. And he says that this is what God is going to do for you, that you go through life and that you're not so occupied with this thing called age. That you go through life and age becomes irrelevant, because you don't worry about that. Because of the gladness that's in your heart, the joy that God has given you. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 6, with 18, 19, 20 in mind, Ecclesiastes chapter 6, he's going to repeat some of the same things that we've already seen. In fact, this is not new territory for us. Now, I think it's very important to make this point before we look at chapter 6, that anytime the Bible writers repeat something, it's important for us to stop and take notice. They're not suffering from this disease of repeating themselves and trying to find space to add more content. And I know college students, I've graded papers before, they just kind of tend to do that. They repeat themselves, they just try to state a paragraph in a different way and, try to add content to the page that they're writing. And that's not what Solomon is doing here. He's not just adding content. He's saying, this is important. Understand this. Anytime the Bible writers repeat themselves, it's important for us to recognize. And so here's the main point that we're going to see in chapter 6. Without God, there is no joy or satisfaction in riches, wealth, and honor. That's what we're going to see. And again, that's a repeat of chapter 5. We saw that in chapter 1, chapter 2, all the way through up to our time here in chapter 6. He's been repeating this over and over again. Chapter 6, verse 1, notice what he says. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men. So this is a common evil, is what he's saying. Verse 2, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and severe affliction. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not have a proper burial, then I say, better is miscarriage than he. For it comes in futility and goes into obscurity. And its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. Verse 7, all man's labor is for his mouth, yet the appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and a striving after the wind. Now he's going to end it here, verse 10 through 12. Whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is. For he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. For there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Now here's something very important to understand about Ecclesiastes chapter 6. Until you believe that there is no true meaning under the sun, you will spend all of your time, energy, and resources doing everything you can do to find meaning under the sun. I want us all to leave here this morning absolutely convinced that there is no meaning out there under the sun. And when Solomon has used this phrase, life under the sun, basically what he means is going through life without the recognition of God. So in other words, if you are trying to do life without recognizing God, then there is no meaning. That there is absolutely no meaning. And until you believe that there's no true meaning under the sun, you will spend all of your time, energy, and resources chasing after something that does not exist. Now, throughout chapter 6, Solomon is going to show us that God wants us to enjoy the giver rather than the gift. That's God's desire for me. That's God's desire for you. God wants us to enjoy the giver rather than the gift. And we know this to be true, right? We understand this to be true. We understand that we should enjoy the giver more than the gift. Now, the interesting thing that Solomon does for us is he is going to remind us that there is an alarm system that we have inside of us. That because of God's grace, He has wired us with this alarm system. And when we are not walking properly with God, that alarm system is going to be going off. In fact, I was reminded this past week, many of you know that we just moved a couple of weeks ago, and with our home, we have a security system. And what I've discovered about a security system is you need to pay attention that they're there. They're designed to do one thing. They're designed to remind you that you are being protected. It was crazy the other morning. I was up early in the morning, and I was taking Zoe out to go and potty outside. And so I opened the door, and unfortunately, I did not disarm the alarm system. And guess what happened? Everybody in the house discovered that I had not disarmed the alarm system. Not only did the people in my home discover that, but my neighbors discovered that, And so there's an alarm going off, and the reality is this morning, the lack of joy and the lack of satisfaction in your life is an alarm system that God has put in you to say things are not right. So right now, I don't know where you're at, but I know this to be true of everybody. If you do not have joy and if you do not have satisfaction, that is God's alarm system in your life that's going off, that's saying, hey, something is not right. Something has gone south. And so we need to listen up. In fact, as we think about this idea of the alarm system, we understand that in this text before us, Solomon is going to show us basically that stuff without joy is evil. And he's also going to remind us that food without satisfaction is empty. And then he's going to end it for us there in verses 10 through 12. And he's going to show us the reality of life. He's going to say in verses 10 through 12, this is reality. This is what you need to know. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this idea of stuff without joy. And so the lack of joy, the lack of satisfaction is the alarm system going off in our lives that says, hey, something is not right. We need to understand why this is this way. And so verses 1 to 6, stuff without joy is evil. God intends for you and He intends for me to experience joy. That's God's desire. He wants you to experience joy. Now watch this. That there is an evil. In fact, He says it's evil if you do not experience joy. There's an evil which I've seen under the sun. This is life without recognizing the presence of God, and it is prevalent among men. This is common. This is the norm. This is how people live. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God has empowered him to eat from them, has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them, and this is vanity and a severe affliction. Now you look at chapter 6, verses 1 through 2 here, and you see that, again, God's desire is that we experience joy. And when we do not experience joy, we are walking in the custom of humanity. This is common. And then he says, God has given people riches and wealth and honor. He's given them that. So I think it's important for us to kind of understand that all the gifts that we have, all the abilities that we have, all the resources that are at our disposal is God's gift to us. God has given us that. Many times we go through life and we think that we've accomplished these things, that we've accomplished the wealth, and that we've accomplished this fame. Look at how hard I've worked. But Solomon says no. He says it's a gift from God. God has given you this. And then that's the sovereign hand of God in the wealth and honor and resources that He's provided. But notice He also says that His soul is not lacking for anything. This is a guy that if he sees something, he gets it. Whatever he wants, he spares no expense. He goes after it. But here's the problem. Again, God is in the equation. God has empowered him. God has not empowered him to eat from them. God is the giver, but God is not letting the people enjoy these things. You read that and you think, well, that's cruel. That's a cruel thing for God to do, right? I mean, why? Why would he do that? Why would God give people gifts and then not allow them to enjoy those gifts? I think that's a fair question that we need to ask. And quite honestly, here's the simple answer to that question. God does not let people enjoy those things because of his grace and because of his love. Because you see, God knows that automatically we're going to go after those things. We're going to run after them. And what God has done is he said, I am not going to allow you to find the joy that you're looking for in those things. It's not going to happen. And so that is God's gift of grace. It's his mercy. Because what that should do is it should point us toward God. We should say, I can't find joy here. Therefore, there is a God-sized hole in my heart. Where can I find joy? And that directs us to him. That directs us to God. I think the reality is very close to what Will Rogers once said. Too many people spend money they did not earn, buying things they do not need, trying to impress people they do not like. That's just the reality, right? We go through life with that mindset. We spend all kind of money that we didn't earn. We're buying all kinds of things that we do not need. And ultimately, we're trying to impress people that we really do not like. What vanity. What vanity before us. And then he says, verse 3, if a man fathers 100 children. Now, you got to be reminded that in the Old Testament and in the Bible particularly, having children is a blessing from the Lord. I know some of you parents don't feel that way at times, but the Bible actually affirms that children are a blessing from the Lord. And so if a man fathers 100 children and lives many, many years, so the longevity of life, again, having children, having a long life, both of those are blessings from God, however many they be. But his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial. Then I say, better the miscarriage than he. That is a pretty hard statement. And now he's not minimizing the effect and the impact of a miscarriage. He's not doing that at all. What he's doing is he's highlighting the life that goes on and on, this continual cycle. They get on the treadmill of life and they think that they're going to find joy and happiness here, but they do not find it. They do not find what they're looking for. Then he is saying, better is the miscarriage, the child who is now with God, than the many years this man spends on earth. For it comes in futility, he says, and goes to obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It's interesting. He doesn't even recognize a name. I've been around many people who have gone through miscarriages, and one of the things that we've done within our culture is we've actually encouraged people to name the child that they've miscarried. And this is a way to kind of help through that process. And here in this text, he doesn't even name the child. The child has no name. It goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. A man who has many, many children, a man who has spent many, many years on earth. He's saying this miscarried child is better off. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice, does not enjoy all good things, do not all go to one place. And the reminder there is that ultimately we're going to end at the same place. Now, he's not saying that, all dogs die and go to heaven. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying that when life ends, we go to the grave. And that's what he's saying. We all go there. We all go to the grave. He's not giving information about the afterlife. He's just saying life under the sun, we all go to the grave. Now, how does the New Testament pick up on this idea? Because it's consistent throughout the Bible. Notice what he says in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Notice. Godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. So when you're content, when you have a godly life, that's a great thing. And this sounds very much like Solomon, verse 7, for we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out either. If we have food and covering, if we have food for the stomach, and we have a shelter, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptations and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. What a sad indictment. People have actually wandered away from God because of their desire for money. Their pursuit of joy has led them away from God. Instead of the alarm system going off, turning them to God, their alarm system went off and it turned them away from God. That there's no joy. And so they say, well, I need to get on this treadmill and I just need to turn up the speed a little bit more. I need to go a little bit faster because eventually it's going to come. And they find that it never, ever satisfies. You see, godly wisdom says that we need to love the giver more than the gift. We need to love the giver more than the gift. Now, he continues to drive home this same point in verses 7 through 9. Notice what he says. This is going to be the food without satisfaction is empty. Verse 7, all a man's labor is for the mouth. How do you like that for a nice Sunday morning? The reason you go to work is for food. The reason you work is for food. All man's labor is for the mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. So you're working, you're buying food. You're buying food, and your stomach is just not satisfied. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? And so he's bringing us to the same point that he just left us there in verses 1 to 6. If you go through life and you do not have satisfaction, if you're not satisfied, that is God's alarm system going off saying, hey, something is not right. Now, verse 9 is going to answer the dilemma that he brought up in verse 8. Notice what he says. What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and a striving after the wind. What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. In other words, he's saying to be content with what God has given is better than chasing after that which can never satisfy. That's what he's saying in verse 9. We need to learn how to be content. We need to learn contentment. He's driving home this point. He's reminding us that our true joy and our true satisfaction only comes from God. That the things that are around us, the gifts that he has given, can never satisfy. You will come up empty with that street every single day. Now, verses 10 through 12, notice here. Verses 10 to 12, the reality of life. In other words, the end of me and the beginning of him. That's where he's leading us. He's saying, here's a reality that you need to understand. You need to come to a place where you're at the end of me and at the beginning of him. So, verse 10. Whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is. That word man there is the Hebrew word Adam. And it's a reminder of the fact that you come from dust and you're going to go back to dust. What you've come from is where you're going to return. So whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is. It's known. For he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. So what he's talking about here in verse 10, when he uses this phrase, he cannot dispute with the one who is stronger than he is, he's talking about God. In other words, you can argue with God all day long, but it's not going to change a simple thing. It is not going to change a simple thing. It's just like Zoe looking at me and saying, I'm not getting in my kennel right now. And I say, oh, yes, you are. Your time has been limited. We're going to put a halt to this. I'm going to change the game for you. And so it's the same way with God. No matter how hard I try, I cannot change who I am. I know some of us have a God complex, but just because we have a God complex does not mean we're God. So we need to understand that. No matter how hard I try, I can't change who I am. Verse 11, for there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage? In other words, how's this working out best for this particular person? How does it work out best for this man? It just seems the more I try, the more difficult it is to understand. The more I try to understand this thing of joy and satisfaction, it just seems the harder it gets. I don't know if you've felt that before. You say, well, I'm doing all the right things. This is what society has taught me to do, and I'm just going to go down this path. And it just seems like the more I chase down this path, the more difficult it becomes to understand. So how do we get there? How do we get to the place where we understand that our greatest joy and our greatest satisfaction is only found in God? It's much like Job. Job had the mentality, I came into this world with nothing and I will leave with nothing. That's where Job eventually came. So we all exit planet Earth the same way. We're going to leave this earth the same way. It doesn't matter your social status. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have. It doesn't matter how much fame and recognition you have. You're going to leave this earth the same way that you came in. We're going to all leave the same way. Verse 12. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his life. And he's going to turn the page here because he's asking this question. You're going to notice a marked difference in chapter 7. But who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime? He's bringing this fair question up. He will spend them like a shadow. How does that make you feel? That your life is literally like a shadow. Have you ever seen a shadow? Have you ever chased after a shadow? It's fleeting. It chases. You chase it away. So you're spending your life like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? No matter how hard I try, I can't explain this dilemma. That's the conclusion he came to. Now here's a very important realization that Solomon understands. He understands his humanity. He understands his humanity. He understands because of the wisdom of God, God's wisdom has been given to him to where he sees that there is more to life than under the sun. There's more to this life than under the sun. We live for the here and now, the moment before us. But he's saying, no, there's something more. There's something more. I love this. Billy Graham, he once said, you're born, you suffer, you die, and fortunately there is a loophole. Fortunately, there's a loophole. There's a loophole to this being born, suffering, and dying. And that loophole has been named Jesus. Jesus is the loophole. Because under the sun, life makes no sense. But above the sun, life now has meaning. Now, I find it very interesting that with all the wisdom of Solomon, he did not see the greatest gift that God gave. He didn't see that one. That's his son. We have the opportunity today to see the gift, the greatest gift ever in Jesus. And when we live life above the sun, we recognize that we are a new creation in Christ. That we no longer chase after the things that the world is chasing after to try to find joy and satisfaction. That we understand that our joy and our satisfaction comes from being in the presence of God. That's where we find our ultimate joy and satisfaction. Nothing else can compare. So application for me, application for you. The word I would say to us today, the word I think Solomon has spoken to us is that we need to grow in wisdom. My prayer for me, my prayer for you, my prayer for this church is that we grow in wisdom. And there are two specific things I think is important for us to realize. One, recognize your humanity. Recognize that your time on this earth is limited. You have a limited time. The Bible makes it very clear that it is appointed unto man to die once, and then comes the judgment. There are no do-overs in this life. There are no real second chances to life. It's a one-and-done situation. So recognize your humanity. And then the second thing I think Solomon is driving home in this area of wisdom is that we need to fall in love with the giver rather than the gift. God is the giver of all things. He's the giver of all good gifts, but He gave us the greatest gift in Christ. And the plea that I have with you and the plea that I have with me this morning is that we fall in love with that giver. That we recognize that the gifts, though they may be nice and though they may be enjoyable, will never compare to the greatest gift that He gave. He gave Jesus. This morning, if you do not know Christ, if you do not know that greatest gift, I want to talk with you before you leave here. That decision is too important to leave here and not know the greatest gift that's ever been given. This morning, if you're here and you hear the words of wisdom that Solomon is crying out, I pray that you recognize your humanity and that you truly fall in love with this great giver who gave the greatest gift in Jesus. Let me pray for us.